my name is Kaylee, and I am doing my research project over the effects that physical therapy has on individuals with Down syndrome. I made a little just about me page. I actually want to be a physical therapist, so this was a really fun topic for me to do this over, and I want to work with kids with disabilities. Well, I haven't decided if I want to work with kids or adults, but I think this study was it was really fun for me to kind of do my research on and kind of look at how physical therapists actually help this population. The first informative slide that I decided to do was just kind of stating what Down syndrome is. So essentially, each and every one of us are made of billions and billions and billions of cells, and each cell has a nucleus. And each nuclei includes our genetic codes, and which is responsible for our inherited traits and chromosomes. And so individuals with Down syndrome actually have a extra chromosome 21. And so a normal person would have 23 pairs of chromosomes, so half of that would be from the mother and half of that would be from the father. But a individual with Down syndrome has an extra chromosome. So just a little fun fact here, one of every 700 to 1,000 babies are born with Down syndrome. So that kind of seems like, a lot, but it's not as uncommon as we may think, considering the fact that there's like thousands and thousands and thousands of babies born a day. So I thought that was a really interesting fact. So I wanted to go ahead and kind of touch on the physical traits that a child with Down syndrome may have. I'm trying to get there we go. So a child with Down syndrome, or an individual with Down syndrome, has a flatter face, a flatter nose, they have a smaller stature, low muscle tone. Obesity is very common in individuals with Down syndrome. And just some of the minor details is they actually have a crease in the middle of their palm, as right here. So I think that's really interesting that they have that, and I think it's kind of interesting that scientists really look at the minor itty-gritty details when it comes to the physical traits as well. So the category or the type of Down syndrome that I'm going to be focusing on today is trisomy 21, and that accounts for 93 to 95% of all of the Down syndrome cases. So that is like a huge chunk of the Down syndrome population. Right over here is just kind of a picture of what that looks like, what the chromosomes look like, and what a genetic makeup for a child with Down syndrome would look like. So trisomy 21 is thought to be caused by an issue or an error in the cell division called non-dysfunction. So non-disjunction means that the embryo actually makes an extra chromosome. So you have 3 of chromosome 21 instead of 2. So that is essentially like how they think this was made up. But the known cause for trisomy 21 is not, like why the error happens is not known quite yet. For the longest time, research came out and said that if you give birth over the age of 35, your child is more likely to have Down syndrome. But with the recent boom in younger mothers, they're starting to see that this new study, 80% of the individuals that were born with Down syndrome actually have their mothers were actually under the age of 35. So kind of like, they thought they might be getting somewhere, and then that said something else. So I think there's a long way for us to go on the research of Down syndrome, but I think that it's really awesome that we're kind of looking into that. And only 5% of the cases were tracked back to the father, which means the majority of the cases are thought to be tracked to the mother. So it is genetic, but it is not hereditary. Only 1% of the cases have been thought to be hereditary, so kind of interesting. A lot of research to be done on that topic. So just a little bit of new research about the older population or the older individuals with Down syndrome. As time goes on, we're starting to see that more individuals with Down syndrome are beginning to live longer, actually around the age of like 60, which is huge. And that number, or the number of individuals who are living that long, individuals with Down syndrome that are living that long, are predicted to double by the year 2030. So not too far away. And so this means that they're outliving their parents, their caretakers, and stuff like that. And since they are very dependent on different caretakers and stuff like that, the job of physical therapy would be to look at that and say, how can we help these individuals to be more independent? How can we help them be more physically active, help them with their physical and neurological conditions that they develop as they age or as they develop as a child. And so I think that's a really interesting just kind of topic to kind of touch on. I thought this picture is really cute. It's an old man with Down syndrome. So the next one is, how can physical therapy help? So individuals with Down syndrome, just as they develop, we begin to see a lot more conditions in them. So thyroid dysfunctions such as hypothyroid, obesity is a huge issue, and it's very common. A lot of doctors are actually kind of measuring this by BMI, which I think, in my personal opinion, is just kind of inaccurate. There's a lot of big bodybuilders with six-packs, and their BMI says that they are morbidly obese. So it doesn't really make much sense. So I think that a better way to look at that would be to check their body fat percentage. Men over 28%, they are thought to be overweight, and women over 32% are overweight. So kind of interesting there. I think that's a good way to kind of measure that and kind of measure their progress. Musculoskeletal disorders are huge, such as osteoporosis, arthritis, hip dysplasia, just a couple of the things that we're starting to see, a couple of the physical conditions that we're starting to see, and those are all right here. So, and cardiovascular, so such as like heart failure, endocarditis, different conditions that we're starting to see that are popping up in individuals with Down syndrome. And then a couple of the neurological disorders are Alzheimer's and depression. And I added this picture here. The blue picture is an individual with depression, and this individual over here with more light is a individual without depression. So we see a lot more activity in the brain in an individual that does not have depression versus an individual that does or who is depressed. And so I think that has a lot of effect on how that person thinks, how they develop, and how they live their day-to-day life. So just a little bit more details on the physical conditions. Hypothyroid is very common. I've kind of already went over this, but hip dysplasia, osteoporosis are just like a couple of the musculoskeletal, obesity, hypothyroid, and endocarditis and heart failure. So a couple of the important ones. So just the first study I looked at was they actually looked at strength training and how strength training helps individuals with Down syndrome, which I thought was really interesting as a personal trainer. I like strength training, and I've seen a lot of improvement with strength training as well. And so I think this was a very interesting take on for these individuals. So essentially they put them on a 12-week program, and they did exercise for 30 to 35 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week, and they focused on their quadriceps femoris and their hamstrings, and they kind of wanted to see how this helped with their functional motor skills and their dynamic balance. So and they really kind of focused on walking specifically. So I thought this was very, very interesting. They just did different strength exercises with them, just to kind of see, could they keep that muscle tone, because they do have an issue with low muscle tone. Does it help with the obesity issue here? Bone density, is it helping with their osteoporosis issue here? Mentally, is it helping them, etc. They looked at a lot of different things here, and so they found that a couple of the effects of strength training is it really helped with their isokinetic torque. So I think that's right. Okay, isokinetic peak torque, sorry. And so this really helped with their fundamental motor skills, such as walking, running, going up the stairs, being able to do things just independently. And they also saw that they were actually able to hold the muscle they had gained, even just like a normal person was. So this is like huge. Actually, less than 40% of individuals with Down syndrome get any sort of physical activity at all. And so this was a really good study to kind of push them to have that physical activity in their day-to-day life. And so I think this was like really, really awesome. It gave them a great opportunity, just like we get in this class here, to help them kind of get out. Just another research, the second research study that I looked at, they actually looked at children, and they looked at how can they help them develop similarly to a normal child, or a child who would not have Down syndrome. Like how can we help them develop at a similar rate? And so they took babies, 3 babies, around 2 years old, which means they should be walking without assistance and stuff. But since they have a lifelong developmental delay, some of the individuals, or the children with Down syndrome, couldn't do things on their own quite yet. Or things that they should be doing on their own quite yet. And so they looked at how physical therapy can really help that. So they did something similar. They put them on a program where they worked 3 times a week for a little bit longer. So they worked for like 45 minutes. And what they did, so 30 to 50 minutes. So what they did was they worked on just a couple of the skills, like climbing upstairs, walking by themselves, walking with assistance, etc. And what they found, they actually based all of their progress on a basic motor skill test. And so this all included the walking and maybe the running or whatever it was that they've been doing or that they should be doing. They kind of focused on how did this improve. And so at the end, each of the 3 children with Down syndrome improved by at least 1 point in their score. So no one really stayed the same or anything. Everyone really improved. So I think that was a really awesome find. It could really help with different children that, as stated multiple times, Down syndrome is a lifelong developmental delay. So if we can kind of help with that, like starting at their childhood at 2 years old, then that would set them up for success, like as they move in through their life. So just kind of a conclusion here. I added a picture of a person with Down syndrome, or an individual with Down syndrome who is actually competes competitively with weight training. So I thought that was super awesome that they're kind of moving forward in this research. Just a couple conclusions is that physical therapy can really help with their strength and kind of help them be more independent physically, and kind of help them move around better, develop closer to the speed of maybe a normal person might develop like as they move through life. And this would hopefully kind of set apart those limitations or restrictions that are put on individuals with Down syndrome throughout school, in the gym, just walking down the street or whatever it is. A lot of the times, like in PE, for an example, individuals with Down syndrome versus individuals without Down syndrome are usually separated. And so hopefully physical therapy can help them develop and can kind of maybe not eliminate, but kind of like assist the restrictions, assist getting rid of the restrictions here. So, and then my last slide here is just a couple citations. So, thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed all of this information.